Shoot them!
It was the kind of house you'd drive past without noticing. Set back in the trees, shaded by clouds and moss, like so many others in Seattle. But this house would become a monument to loss. A few days into April 1994, a man walked through the greenhouse over the garage and found what no one wanted to believe. Kurt Cobain was gone. And almost instantly, the world fell silent. Fans, friends, an entire generation stunned. It wasn't just another headline. It was the end of an era, a voice that spoke to millions. Suddenly, quiet.
The body of Kurt Cobain was found in a room above the garage of his fashionable Lake Washington Boulevard home in Seattle.
Kurt Cobain was found dead this morning at his Seattle estate. The lead singer of Nirvana was apparently at the house alone.
Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of the enormously popular rock band Nirvana, is dead.
From Dead Notes, this is where music meets mystery, where every chord carries an echo, and every silence has a story. I'm Ben Cooper, and this is The Hollow Crown, Kurt Cobain and the Price of Fame. He didn't ask to be a voice of a generation, but it found him anyway. Kurt Cobain was born in Aberdeen, Washington, a logging town, gray and working class, where art felt like an afterthought. Even as a kid, he felt like a misfit. He drew. He listened to records alone in his room. He bounced between his parents' homes after a painful divorce. By the time he was a teenager, that ache, that split, was already stitched into his music. He discovered punk rock, and it was like a fuse that lit under him. Anger, isolation, rebellion. He poured it all into his band, Nirvana. At first, they were just another trio from the Pacific Northwest, scraping together gigs, recording raw demos, sleeping in vans. But then, the sound, the look, the voice. Grunge went global. And Kurt Cobain, he became the reluctant face of it all. Fame hit like a tidal wave. MTV, magazine covers, sold-out tours. And Cobain, he hated almost all of it. To him, Nirvana was never supposed to be mainstream. They weren't supposed to be anyone's anthem band. But suddenly, the same record execs and frat boys he once mocked were calling him a genius. He wanted to make noise, raw, emotional, messy. But they wanted hits, catchy hooks, and a smile for the camera charm. Kurt smiled, but his eyes never did. He became a spokesman for a generation. But inside, the spotlight burned. He was fighting heroin addiction, chronic stomach pain, depression that never really let go. And the media? They circled like vultures over his drug use, his marriage, and his music. He once said, "I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I'm not." But what if you're both? What if the very thing you're loved for becomes the very thing that breaks you? Rome, March 3rd, 1994. A romantic getaway Or so it seemed. Kurt and Courtney had flown to Italy with their daughter, Frances Bean. It was supposed to be a breather, a pause from the chaos back home. But something darker came instead.
Stars lead a wild and sometimes dangerous life, but Kurt Cobain's partying almost killed him. The lead singer of the rock band Nirvana is slowly recovering from a massive drug overdose in Rome. Cobain slipped into a coma last night after taking a large dose of painkillers with champagne, but he is conscious again and doctors are optimistic he's going to fully recover.
That night, Courtney found Kurt collapsed in their hotel room, unconscious. A mix of champagne and Rohypnol in his system. He was rushed to the hospital, placed on a ventilator. For a while, no one knew if he would wake up. Later, their story was revised. It was an accident, they said. A mix-up. Just too much of the wrong thing. But some say that was the first attempt. A warning shot. Kurt eventually came to and went back to Seattle. But something had shifted. He started disappearing from home, avoiding calls, locking himself away with his guitar and his ghosts. The man who sang, "I hate myself, I want to die," wasn't joking. And no one, not his friends, his bandmates, or even Courtney, could seem to reach him anymore. Back in Seattle, things weren't quiet. They were unraveling. By late March 1994, Kurt had enough of rehab, slipped away from the treatment center by jumping the wall. No one knew where he went.
He just slipped over the wall, which was always, sort of a fascinating thing to all the employees that worked there because the door was just down the hallway. Could easily walk out. There were no cameras. There were no guards on the door, and probably nobody would have noticed him missing for 30 minutes anyway.
No one knew where he'd gone. For 6 days, he was off the grid. Friends worried. Courtney was panicking. She even hired a private investigator to track him down. What led to that moment? Well, before Rome, before the overdose, there were signs. A close circle of friends, including Nirvana's manager, Courtney, and a few bandmates, staged an intervention. They begged Kurt to get help, to go to rehab. He agreed, at least on the surface. But the truth? Kurt Cobain didn't want saving. He wanted silence. To him, fame wasn't a gift. It was a leash. So when he slipped away from the treatment center, people feared the worst. And soon, they were right. It was April 8, 1994, a Friday morning. An electrician named Gary Smith arrived at the house on Lake Washington Boulevard. He'd been hired to install a security system. He stepped around the side of the home, toward the greenhouse above the garage. And that's when he saw it.
Holy shit.
Through the glass, a man lying on the floor, motionless, a shotgun across his chest, a pool of blood beneath him, and a suicide note stuck in a planter with a red pen. Gary didn't know who it was, not at first. But soon, the word spread. It was Kurt Cobain.
The body of Nirvana leader Kurt Cobain was found in a house in Seattle on Friday morning, dead of an apparently self-inflicted shotgun blast to the head. Police found what is said to be a suicide note at the scene, but have not yet divulged its contents. Cobain, who was 27, had reportedly been missing for several days. The Los Angeles Times reported on Wednesday that Nirvana was breaking up and that Cobain was planning to undergo drug rehabilitation. Cobain's body was found in a house in Seattle where he had previously lived. It was discovered by an electrician who had showed up at around 8 a.m. to do some work at the house. He looked in a window and said he recognized the body on the floor as Cobain's.
He had a shotgun laying across, pointing to his neck, and there was a suicide note stuck in a potted plant that had been dumped out.
At just 27 years old, one of rock's most tortured voices was gone. Police ruled it as suicide. Gunshot wound to the head. High levels of heroin in his system. The note was addressed to his childhood imaginary friend, Bada. In it, Kurt wrote he lost his passion for music and for life. But even from the start, not everyone believed that that was the full story. Seattle fell into silence, and then into sorrow. By the hundreds, fans poured into the park next to Kurt's home, holding candles, signs, and one another. They sang his songs, they screamed his lyrics, and they cried for a man they never met, but felt they knew.
Some assignments are tougher than others. This is one of the toughest. This is attending the Kurt Cobain Memorial at Seattle Center. Some 10,000 people in this area. It used to be the site of the World's Fair, right underneath the Space Needle. And they've come here out of grief and frustration, some of them out of anger. Anger at being abandoned by one of their heroes. But everybody came for one reason, to pay their respects to Kurt Cobain. And yes, there were eulogies. Yes, there were people from all walks of life. Whole families were here. But it wasn't until a tape was played from Courtney Love that literally the place and time stood still.
Courtney Love, Cobain's widow, had pre-recorded herself. She read parts of the suicide note to the crowd.
He always said he was going to outlive everybody and be 120. I'm not going to read you all the note because it's none of the rest of your fucking business, but some of it is to you. I don't really think it takes away his dignity to read this, considering that it's addressed to most of you.
Just a great performer, and he was really good in concerts, and he had those great music, and now all of a sudden he's gone.
You just got to move on, you know. It's a tragedy, and it is a tragedy. But you got to move on. You got to think about what he did do, and not what he. You got to think of his musical talents, what he did, and just don't think about that tragic morning whenever he chose to take his own life.
I'm really worried about Courtney now at this point. You know, I mean. She's had a rough time with the media before, and I could just see that a lot of people would make a field day out of this.
It was raw, public, and for millions of fans, it was the final confirmation of a loss too heavy to bear. Kurt's body was removed quietly from the greenhouse, watching as the world's cameras turned towards Seattle. In the days that followed, headlines blared, "Voice of a Generation, gone at 27." Radio stations played Nirvana nonstop. Nevermind and In Utero climbed to the charts again. It felt like everyone was trying to hold on to him, in whatever way they could. Kurt's death left a hole. In music, in culture, in the hearts of those who saw him as not just an idol, but as kind of a mirror. Kurt Cobain left more than just songs. He left a blueprint for honesty, for vulnerability, for music that refused to lie. In the weeks after his death, Nirvana's final recordings became sacred artifacts. Their MTV Unplugged performance, recorded just months before, felt like a farewell we didn't know we were hearing. He was 27 years old, and with his passing, he joined a haunting list. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, all gone at the same age. The 27 Club became a myth, but Kurt's story was painfully real. Even now, decades later, you can hear his voice, raw, imperfect, unpolished, and feel the ache of a man who never stopped searching for peace. He was the king of the kingdom he never asked to rule, anointed by a generation, burdened by brilliance, haunted by the very thing that made him great. Kurt Cobain wanted to make music, but the world wanted a messiah, an icon, a voice. And when you wear a crown too long, you forget what your own voice sounds like. Fame isn't just a spotlight, it's a furnace. And some artists, they burn too bright, too fast. Kurt Cobain didn't live to see his influence, didn't hear his echo in the voices that followed. But we do. You hear it, in the silence after the song ends, in the space between chords, in the raw, unpolished truth so many still try to imitate. He didn't just want to be a legend. He just wanted to be left alone. But that's not how this story ends, because legends don't get to leave. They linger. In tape hiss and distortion, in graffiti on bathroom walls, and in the questions that still remain. And above it all, in the voice that once screamed and now only whispers. This was Hollow Crown, the story of Kurt Cobain. And this is Dead Notes. If this episode moved you, I'd love for you to join me on Dead Notes over at Substack, where I share deeper reflections, behind-the-scenes notes, and more stories like this. And if you can, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who loves music history. It helps keep these stories alive. I'm Ben Cooper. Thanks for listening.